The night was quiet on the edge of the valley. The stars shone above the dry land, and the wind whispered against the old wooden house where a single human father lived with his daughter. He was used to silence, used to the life of a man who had lost much but held on for the sake of the little girl who depended on him. His hands were rough from work. Every day he fixed broken machines for nearby settlers. It was not a rich life, but it was steady. He found purpose in his daughter's laughter, and he found strength in her smile. She was the only reason he kept going. Then the world changed in a single flash of fire. The sky split open with a roar so loud it shook the earth. A burning streak of light raced across the heavens and crashed into the far end of the valley. The ground trembled. Birds rose in a storm of wings. His daughter screamed, clutching at his arm. "Stay inside," he told her. His voice was firm, but his eyes were calm. She trusted him. She always did. He took his lantern, his old tools, and walked toward the smoke. Each step echoed with danger. He knew this was not a falling rock. It was something greater, something unknown. The closer he came, the clearer it grew. A massive shape rested in the crater. Black metal twisted and bent, sparks jumping like angry fireflies. Strange glowing symbols ran across its hull. He had seen pictures of ships in old books, but nothing like this. This was alien. The air smelled of burning oil and iron. He heard a low hum from deep inside the wreck, like the sound of a wounded beast. He hesitated. His heart told him to turn back, but his will pushed him forward. Someone inside might need help. He climbed into the broken hatch, his boots crunching over shards of crystal and metal. The ship's interior glowed with blue light, pulsing as if alive. Strange panels flickered, and sharp wires hung like claws from the ceiling. The heat pressed against his skin. Then he heard it. A sound soft but filled with pain. A cry. He turned and froze. There she was. A giant alien woman lay half buried under a fallen support beam. Her skin shone faintly, pale like silver under moonlight. Her hair was long, flowing, and strange symbols glowed across her armor. Her eyes, though weak, locked onto his. They were the brightest eyes he had ever seen, deep with a power that felt older than the stars. She tried to rise, but the beam held her down. Sparks rained near her. The ship groaned as if it would collapse at any moment. For a moment he could only stare. She was unlike anything he had ever imagined. A figure of both danger and beauty, trapped and helpless. Fear battled with compassion in his chest. Her voice came, weak and broken. Words in a language he did not know, but filled with pleading. He stepped closer, his lantern shaking in his hand. He could walk away. He could leave her to her fate. But the thought of leaving anyone, even an alien, to die while he still had strength, felt wrong. The father dropped his tools on the ground, took a deep breath, and pushed against the beam. His muscles strained. Sweat ran down his face. The metal was heavy, but slowly, inch by inch, it shifted. The alien woman gasped as the pressure lifted. With a final effort, he shoved the beam aside. She was free. She lay there, her chest rising and falling. Her gaze softened. Her lips moved again. This time, though he did not know her words, he felt their meaning. It was gratitude. The father nodded. "You are safe now." His voice was steady, though his heart was racing. He pulled his water flask from his belt and offered it. She hesitated, then took it with hands that trembled. She drank, and for the first time, he saw a hint of relief on her face. Behind him, the ship hissed, sparks leaping higher. Systems were failing. If nothing was done, the wreck would burn or explode. He looked around, scanning the strange alien controls. His instincts as a fixer, as a man who had lived by repairing broken things, came alive. He knelt beside the glowing panels, studying the connections. The technology was unlike anything human, but the logic of broken machines was always the same. Power. Flow. Resistance. He turned back to the alien. "I can try to fix it. But you must guide me." Her eyes widened, then softened. She nodded once, slow and sure. The father gripped his tools. The night outside was silent, but inside the wreck sparks, smoke, and the pulse of strange light filled the air. He worked, hands moving fast, guided by instinct and the faint gestures she made. Each wire he joined, each panel he forced into place, drew him deeper into her world. A world of power, mystery, and danger. And as the ship hummed to life under his touch, he did not know that the woman he had saved was no ordinary traveler. She was a princess, the richest and most powerful in the galaxy. And his act of mercy would change not only his life, but the fate of worlds. The night wind carried the smoke away, but the fire that had begun in that valley would burn far brighter than the stars above. The night stretched long after the crash, and the human father did not leave the wreck. His daughter waited at the edge of the crater, clutching the lantern he had given her. She called softly for him, her voice filled with worry. "I am here," he answered, his voice carrying through the smoke. He wanted to keep her calm, even as his own heart raced. Inside the ship, the giant alien woman lay against the broken wall. Her wounds glowed faintly as if the light came from her very blood. Her breathing was slow, heavy, almost painful. He could see that she was strong, yet she was too weak to rise. He moved closer, crouching down so their eyes met. She did not speak his language, yet her gaze spoke enough. She was proud, but she was also afraid. She did not want to show fear, but it lingered in her trembling hands. The father took a small cloth from his pack and dipped it in water. He pressed it gently to the cut on her arm. The alien flinched, then stilled. She studied him with sharp eyes, as if asking why he would help. "My daughter would not forgive me if I walked away," he said softly, knowing she could not understand his words. But maybe, just maybe, she could feel his meaning. When the cloth touched her skin again, she let him tend the wound. The hours dragged on. He worked on the damaged panels whenever the ship hissed or sparked. He returned to her side whenever she gasped in pain. Slowly, her eyes softened. She no longer looked at him as a stranger. She looked at him as something more. At last, he heard small footsteps. His daughter climbed carefully inside, carrying a small bundle of food. She was frightened, but her heart was kind. She walked up to the alien and held out the bread. The princess stared at the offering, then at the little girl. For a long moment, silence filled the air. Finally, with hands that shook, the alien accepted the bread. She brought it to her lips and took a single bite. Her throat worked as she swallowed. Then she whispered a sound, low and melodic. It was not human, yet it carried warmth. The girl smiled. "She said thank you, Dad?" "I know she did." The father nodded. Maybe the child was right. The giant closed her eyes, but not in distrust. It was a gesture of rest, of a warrior lowering her guard. She trusted them now, even if only a little. The father sat against the wall, watching the faint glow of the ship's dying lights. He listened to his daughter whisper to the alien, as if her simple words might cross the barrier between their worlds. The alien listened too. Something gentle filled the air. Not peace, not safety, but something like the first spark of friendship. Yet behind that bond, questions burned in his mind. Who was she? Why did she fall here, so far from the stars? And what storm would follow her? He looked at his daughter, then at the alien princess who rested against the broken wall. His heart whispered the truth he did not yet want to face. Their lives had already changed. The moment he chose to save her, their path was no longer their own. But for now, he allowed silence. For now, he allowed the bond to grow, like a fragile seed planted in the ashes of fire. And somewhere, far above the valley, signals raced into the dark sky, carrying a message he did not know. Enemies were listening. The galaxy was watching. The father closed his eyes only for a moment, but his hand stayed on his tools. The bond was silent, but it was strong. Strong enough to keep him by her side, no matter what the dawn might bring. The morning sun rose over the valley, painting the sky in pale gold. Smoke still drifted from the crater where the ship had fallen, but the fires had died. The father stood outside for a moment, breathing the cool air. His daughter clung to his arm, still shaken from the night before. Inside the wreck, the alien princess had survived the night. Her strength was returning, though her movements were still slow and heavy. She sat upright now, her tall frame shadowing the broken walls. Her eyes scanned the room with sharp awareness, yet when they rested on the father and his child, her gaze softened. The father carried a tray of food. Bread, fruit, and warm water. Simple things. He set it near her without a word. She studied the offering, then studied him. At last she accepted a piece of fruit and bit into it. The taste seemed strange to her, yet she ate slowly. His daughter clapped her hands with joy, happy that the alien accepted their kindness. The father turned to the glowing panels on the ship's walls. He had worked late into the night, patching wires and closing leaks of strange liquid energy. But one section of the ship troubled him. A console pulsed with symbols that shifted like living light. Each time he touched it, the hum of the ship changed. The princess noticed. She spoke, her words sharp and commanding, though he could not understand. She pointed at the console, then made a sweeping motion with her hand, as if telling him to be careful. He nodded. Danger! I understand. His voice was calm, though inside he wondered what kind of power rested inside this alien craft. As he studied the console, one symbol caught his eye. A pattern of stars, arranged in a spiral. It was no human map, yet it looked familiar. He traced the shapes with his finger, and his breath caught. He recognized the position of their own sun, a faint point among thousands. The princess saw his reaction. Her face tightened. She reached out quickly and pressed her hand over the panel, covering the star map. Her expression was guarded now, almost fearful. The father stepped back, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. But his mind burned with questions. Who was she truly? Why would she carry maps of every star, every system, when she claimed no words at all? That night, when the child slept curled in a blanket near the wall, the father sat alone with the alien woman. The ship hummed around them, broken yet alive. The lantern's glow lit their faces, casting shadows that flickered like ghosts. He spoke softly, though he knew she could not understand. You are not just a traveler. I can see it in your eyes. You carry secrets. Secrets heavier than the beam I pulled from you. And I fear they will fall on us all. The princess watched him. She did not know his words, but she seemed to sense their meaning. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Instead, she lowered her gaze. For the first time, she looked not like a warrior, but like someone burdened with sorrow. The father leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. He thought of his daughter, of the quiet life they once had. It was already gone. The stars above were reaching for them, pulling them into a story greater than their own. Suddenly, the console flickered. Strange signals flashed across the panels, sending ripples of light through the walls. The princess reacted at once. She rose despite her weakness, her long hair falling over her shoulders, her armor glowing faintly as she pressed her hands against the controls. The father stood quickly, alarmed. What is it? He asked. Her voice came low, urgent, filled with tension. Though he could not understand the words, he understood the fear in her eyes. The signals were not random. They were transmissions. Someone out in the dark had heard the crash. The father clenched his fists. He felt the weight of danger closing in, though the sky above still looked calm. He turned to the princess, who now stood like a figure of fire against the dying lights of her ship. Her secret was no longer just hers. It was reaching across the stars. His daughter stirred in her sleep and whispered softly, She looks like a queen, Dad. The father stared at the princess for a long moment. The child's words were simple, yet they rang true. She was no ordinary wanderer. Her very presence carried a power beyond measure. He did not yet know that she was not only a queen, but the richest and most powerful princess in the galaxy. And the enemies who sought her had already begun their journey. The valley would not remain quiet for long. The second night after the crash was colder. The father wrapped his daughter in thick blankets before guiding her back to their small home. He told her to rest there while he returned to the ship. She wanted to stay with him, but he promised he would not be gone long. Her trust was all he carried with him as he walked back into the valley. The alien princess was waiting. Her wounds were healing faster now, glowing faintly as if her body carried its own light. She stood taller, though weakness still showed in her steps. When she looked at him, her eyes no longer carried suspicion. Instead, they carried something heavier, something she seemed ready to share. He worked on the damaged consoles in silence. Sparks hissed. The air smelled of smoke and strange metal. He felt her watching him, but he did not speak. His hands moved carefully, attaching broken wires, fitting them into place, listening to the hum of power flow through the walls. Then he heard her voice. It was strong, sharp, yet touched with sorrow. He turned and saw her pointing at the map he had uncovered the night before. The stars glowed across the cracked screen, endless points of light stretching across the dark. She touched one glowing mark near the center. Her expression hardened. She spoke in her language, words low and steady. He could not understand, yet the weight in her voice carried meaning. He stepped closer. That is your home, isn't it? Her eyes flickered toward him. She gave a single, slow nod. Then she pressed her hand over her chest, and with the other hand she shaped a crown in the air above her head. The father's breath caught. The gesture was clear. You are royalty, he whispered. The princess lowered her hand, her shoulders heavy. She did not deny it. The father leaned back against the wall, the truth settling in his chest. This was not just a lost traveler. Not just a soldier or a wanderer. She was a princess, and not just any princess. The way her ship was built, the way her enemies had already answered the signal, she was powerful. She was someone the galaxy itself seemed to chase. He thought of his daughter, sleeping in their small bed at home. He thought of the quiet life they once knew. That life was gone now. They had stepped into something far greater. The princess watched him in silence. At last, she lifted her hand and pointed at him. Then she pointed toward the stars, the same map where her home glowed. She spoke again, her voice filled with meaning, though he could not follow her words. But he felt her message. He was part of this now. He had saved her, and because of that, he could not walk away. The father rubbed his rough hands together. I only wanted to fix a ship. I only wanted to help someone who needed me. He shook his head. But I fear I may have invited war into my home. The ship groaned as if answering his words. The console flashed again, news signals racing across its surface. A sound filled the air, high and sharp, like a warning. The princess stiffened, her hand tightening on her weapon. The father looked at her, his stomach sinking. They are coming, aren't they? Her eyes met his. She gave a single, grave nod. He swallowed hard, gripping his tools as if they were weapons. He was no soldier, no warrior of the stars. But he was a father, and he had already chosen his path. He would not abandon her, no matter what storm followed. The princess stepped closer. For the first time, she lowered her head in a gesture of respect. Her hand touched his shoulder, light but steady. Her eyes held his with something unspoken. Gratitude. Trust. And perhaps, deep inside, the first spark of something more. The truth was no longer hidden. She was the richest, most powerful princess in the galaxy. And her enemies were drawing near. The valley would soon burn again. But together they would stand. The third night after the crash began with silence, but it did not last. The valley carried a sound that did not belong to the earth. A low rumble grew louder with each passing moment. The father stood outside the wreck, his lantern shaking in his hand. He knew that sound. It was the sound of ships, not falling from the sky, but descending with purpose. The princess stepped out of the wreck behind him, her tall figure glowing faintly in the moonlight. Her eyes narrowed as she looked toward the horizon. The air trembled, and then fire streaked down through the clouds. Ships. Dozens of them. They landed on the far ridge, their engines kicking up waves of dust and flame. Shadows of soldiers poured out, their armor black and sharp, their weapons glowing red in the dark. The father's breath caught in his throat. He had seen soldiers before, but never like these. They looked like shadows of war itself. The princess gripped her weapon, a long staff of alien steel. The markings on her armor lit with a faint glow. Her voice came low and steady, filled with a calm strength that belied the danger. She knew them. They were her enemies. The father clenched his fists. He thought of his daughter, asleep in their small home on the edge of the valley. If these soldiers reached the house, there would be no safety. No escape. The soldiers marched forward in formation. Their leader stepped out from the front, a tall figure with crimson eyes glowing through his helmet. His voice thundered through the valley, amplified by strange speakers. "Princess," he called, his words sharp but clear. "You cannot hide here. Surrender now, and your death will be swift. Resist, and all who shelter you will suffer." The father's stomach tightened, but he stepped forward. His voice cut through the night. "You will not touch this valley. You will not touch her." The soldiers paused. Even their leader tilted his head at the sight of a single human man standing in defiance. The father had no armor, no weapon. Only his lantern and his tools. Yet his voice carried the weight of a man who would not bend. The princess looked at him in silence, her eyes wide with something between surprise and admiration. The enemy leader laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "A human farmer dares to stand in our path? You are nothing. Step aside." The father shook his head. His jaw tightened. "I fixed her ship. I saved her life. If you want her, you go through me first." The soldiers moved as one, weapons lifting. The first bolt of red fire shot toward him. The princess moved faster than thought. Her staff spun through the air, blocking the blast with a flash of blue light. The force rippled across the valley. The battle began. The soldiers charged, their footsteps pounding the ground. The father grabbed the heavy wrench from his belt and ducked behind a broken engine core. He had no energy weapons, no shields, but he had his mind. He had traps, wires, and the will to protect. He pulled a lever on the console he had repaired earlier. Sparks flew, and the ground near the soldiers erupted in a wave of electric arcs. Several of them fell, their armor crackling. The princess fought like a storm. Her staff struck with blinding light, knocking enemies aside with the power of thunder. Her movements were graceful, sharp, unyielding. She fought not only for herself, but for the human who had stood for her. The father worked beside her, his every action guided by instinct and courage. He pulled wires, redirected power, turned broken machines into weapons. The wrecked ship became their fortress, and every spark he created slowed the tide of enemies. But still they came, more and more. The valley burned with fire, dust, and screams of war. The father's arms ached. His chest heaved. But he did not stop. He could not. Behind every strike, behind every desperate act, he saw the face of his daughter. He fought not only for the princess, but for the little girl who waited in the safety of home. The princess glanced at him between strikes. Her eyes burned with fire, but in them was something more. Respect. Trust. Perhaps even the first hint of admiration that ran deeper than war. Together, a human father and an alien princess stood against an army. The night was no longer silent. It was a storm. And though the valley shook with the power of the enemy, neither of them took a single step back. The battle raged across the valley. Smoke and fire lit the night, turning the sky red. The father stood with his wrench in hand, sweat dripping down his face. His arms ached, but he did not falter. The alien princess fought beside him, her staff glowing with each strike, her presence like a wall of strength against the advancing soldiers. Yet the enemy was endless. Every time one soldier fell, two more appeared. Their leader watched from the ridge, waiting for the humans to break, waiting for the princess to fall. The father ducked behind a pile of broken panels, his chest heaving. He pulled a set of wires from his belt and tied them quickly to a power coil. Sparks leapt across the ground. He glanced at the princess. "Move them this way," he shouted, though he knew she could not understand. But she seemed to sense his intent. With swift, fluid movements, she struck at the soldiers, forcing them to retreat toward the trap. The father flipped the coil's switch. A wave of electricity ripped across the dirt. The soldiers fell in a storm of blue light, their armor smoking. The princess turned her head toward him. For the briefest moment, a smile touched her lips. A small, rare smile that carried more power than any weapon. The father felt a rush of pride. He was not a soldier, but his mind, his skill with broken machines, was enough to stand against an army. Humanity was not weak. Humanity could fight in its own way. But the enemy pressed harder. More soldiers pushed forward, their weapons burning the ground. The father's tools were running out. His traps were almost gone. His body was growing weak. Then he thought of his daughter. He pictured her small hands clutching the blanket, her eyes wide with fear when the sky had burned. He thought of the promise he made, that she would be safe. He rose again, strength returning to his tired limbs. "You will not touch her," he growled through clenched teeth. "Not my child. Not this valley. Not this world." He charged forward, swinging his wrench against the nearest soldier. Metal cracked. Sparks flew. The soldier fell. Another came, and he struck again. Pain shot through his body as a blast grazed his arm, but he did not stop. The princess moved to his side, covering him as he fought. She struck down enemies with graceful precision, but her eyes kept returning to him. Each time he rose after being knocked down, her gaze burned brighter. She saw not just a human. She saw courage that defied the stars themselves. At last, the enemy leader stepped forward. His crimson eyes glowed in the smoke. He raised his weapon and aimed directly at the father. The princess shouted, her voice filled with fury. She leapt, blocking the blast with her staff. The energy flared across the valley, shaking the ground. She stood between the father and the leader, her staff glowing like a star. The leader sneered. "You fight with a human? Pathetic." The princess's reply came sharp and strong in her tongue, words the father could not understand. But he felt their meaning. She was not fighting with a human. She was fighting with an ally. With someone who had chosen to stand when no one else would. The father stepped forward, blood on his arm, his breath heavy. He faced the leader with steady eyes. "You may see me as nothing. But I am a father. And that means I will never stop fighting." The leader raised his weapon again, but before he could fire, the princess struck. Her staff blazed with energy, slamming into his chest. The ground cracked beneath the impact. The leader fell back, his armor shattered, his crimson eyes dimming. The soldiers froze. Without their leader, their formation broke. Some fled into the darkness, others dropped their weapons. The valley grew quiet once more. The father dropped to his knees, exhausted. The princess knelt beside him, placing her hand gently over his wounded arm. Her touch was firm but soft, her eyes filled with gratitude. She spoke, her voice low, her words foreign but her meaning clear. She would not forget what he had done. She would never forget the choice he made. The father looked at her, his chest still heaving. "I only did what I had to do," he whispered. But in his heart he knew it was more. It was the choice of humanity itself. To protect. To stand. To fight for those who could not. The princess's gaze lingered on him. In the glow of the dying fires, there was something deeper than respect in her eyes. Something unspoken, but powerful. The valley was scarred, yet alive. And so were they. Together, they had chosen to fight. The valley was quiet again. Smoke curled upward from the scorched ground, drifting into the pale light of dawn. The battle was over. The enemy had fled. Only silence remained, broken now and then by the crackle of dying flames. The father sat on the ground, his arm wrapped in cloth, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. His daughter ran from their home, tears in her eyes, and threw her small arms around him. He held her close, pressing his forehead against hers, his heart aching with relief. She was safe. That was all that mattered. The alien princess stood nearby, tall and radiant even in her weariness. Her armor was scorched, her staff dented, yet she carried herself with the grace of one who had endured far greater battles. Her golden eyes softened as she watched the human family. For the first time since she had fallen from the sky, she allowed herself a deep breath of peace. The father rose slowly, still holding his daughter's hand. He turned to the princess. "It is finished," he said, though he knew the words were only half true. The soldiers might return. The galaxy might send more. But for now, they had won. The princess stepped closer. She lowered her weapon and placed her hand gently over her chest. Her head bowed in a gesture of deep respect. When she lifted her gaze again, her eyes glistened with meaning. She spoke in her language, the words flowing like music. The father could not understand the details, but he felt the weight of her promise. Gratitude. Loyalty. Something unbreakable. The little girl tilted her head, as if listening with her heart. "She says she will protect us, Dad. Forever." The father looked at the princess in silence. He believed it. He had seen her fight with the fury of a storm. He had seen her stand between him and death. She was no ordinary stranger. She was power beyond measure. And yet, she had chosen to stand with him. The princess reached into a pouch on her armor and pulled out a small crystal, glowing faintly with shifting colors. She held it out to him, her hand steady. He frowned. "What is this?" Her voice came soft, almost tender. Though the words were unknown, her eyes explained what her tongue could not. It was a gift. A bond. A promise that the richest and most powerful princess in the galaxy owed her life to a human father. The father hesitated, then accepted the crystal. It was warm in his palm, pulsing with light as if alive. His daughter gasped with wonder, her small fingers brushing against it. The princess stepped closer still, her height towering over him, yet her presence no longer felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt gentle. She touched his wounded arm again, her hand firm, her touch lingering. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to still. In that moment, no words were needed. They both knew what had been forged in fire. Respect, trust, and something more. A bond deeper than culture, deeper than blood, deeper than the distance between stars. The father lowered his voice. "I only asked for one thing. Safety for my daughter. That is all I ever wanted." The princess's gaze softened even more. She bent slightly, bringing her face closer to his, her golden eyes shimmering with emotion. Her hand tightened on his shoulder, a silent vow. She would grant that wish, and far more. The child smiled, her voice bright with innocence. "Dad, I think she likes you." The father chuckled softly, though his chest tightened with feelings he could not deny. He looked again at the princess, and she looked back, her lips curving with the faintest smile. The rising sun bathed the valley in light. The battle scars remained, but so did the strength of those who had fought. The father knew his life would never return to what it once was. He had fixed a ship. He had saved a life. And in doing so, he had stepped into a story greater than he could imagine. The princess turned toward the sky, her staff raised. With a single command in her tongue, her ship hummed to life. Repairs were almost complete. She could leave now if she wished. But she did not leave. She looked once more at the human father and his daughter. Then she pressed her hand against her heart and pointed at them. Her voice rang with certainty, clear and strong. A vow across worlds. The father did not know her words, but he knew their meaning. She would return. She would not forget. And perhaps one day, when the stars called again, the richest and most powerful princess in the galaxy would come not as a stranger, but as something far closer to his heart. The story of the valley was not the end. It was only the beginning.